I do want to say thank you for having me on talking to this, and I don't just mean that as a humble thank you. I mean a genuine thank you, because otherwise I would be at home painting and decorating. So it's made me escape that. So genuinely thank you for having me on for that excuse. So there's like I said, there's lots of moving parts. There's lots of screens. So you have to bear with me if I click into the wrong place. So firstly, this is me. If you don't know who I am, I'm a full stack C# developer. I don't just do Power Platform. I do pretty much everything with all sorts of integrations. So Salesforce and Shopify and all those things as well. But I like the Power Platform. I think it's a much stronger thing than most other things I work with. So I spend my time around there and the community around that. I am officially a published Flow author at this point, so I have there is a connector in the store, published globally, that was written by me, and I've been through the full certification process. So it's nice to be able to talk about that. I game and I support Liverpool, so that's about it, and that's my details on the right if you want to grab me at any point. So what we're talking about tonight, a few things. So what's a connector, a custom connector, API, and some things we're going to go through this list. I'm starting at the bare bones. So if there is developers on here that have played some stuff, I will probably be going over stuff that you already know, but I'm going to try and cater for everybody and build this story up as it goes. So hopefully you understand why I'm starting in the places I'm in. So we're going to start at the most basic level, which is what is a connector. Now, I used to start this with what is flow. Obviously, I'm going to take a punt that most people in here know what that is, so we can skip over that one. But what is a connector? So a connector is every single little bit of a flow. So every little bit is actually a connector, and they all sort of handle themselves. Nothing is handled within Power Automate or Flow. They will all call externally, whether you realize or not where they're going. That's a different matter. So all four of those things are connectors. And how many connectors are there at the moment? So I know the subject for this session said 300 or something. I always like to start by running this flow. So if I switch over here and press play, you'll hopefully hear my phone beep, which is running this flow, which will tell you that as of right now, this is live tech. Let's see if it works. 411. So there's 411 live right now in the system. So they are published live. That's not custom. That is none of those. That's literally live and published. So there you go. There's 411 right now in the system. Now, you'll recognize some of the names of them. So Google Calendar, Salesforce, so these are all in there, Microsoft To Do. And then that's the one that I wrote. So I just thought I'd throw it in there that you can see this is in there and available and is treated exactly the same as all the other ones. So Salesforce have more money than my business do, I would imagine. But we're not treated any differently. We're in there in the same list, other than the minor preview thing, but that's basically all to do with usage. So what is a custom connector? A custom connector is exactly the same as a normal connector, as a fully published connector. The only difference is, for it to become an official connector, you have to have the rights for the API that it calls behind the scenes. So the magic stuff that it does, if you or your business owns that, you will follow the same process through and just get that custom connector certified. There's no extra clever layer to make it a real one that people can use. So the process that I go through now, Salesforce will have gone through, Google Calendar will have gone through, and that's how they get them all in there. So it's quite clever to know that you are using the same tools that the store will write with them. And the joys of the custom connectors is that they prefer them to be open source. In fact, that's a bad line. That should be the line before it, which is the Power Platform connector. So the official ones are open source now. So if you go to that GitHub link, you can see what they do, which is useful to know. And basically, a custom connector is a bit that you call somebody else's or your own API in a nice, pretty way, because this is Flow, which means low code, no code. And the user interface is good, quite frankly, to do it, and is getting better every time we do it. So it's not. Sometimes you'll use some Microsoft tools, and the challenge itself is to use the tool in a nice way. Thankfully, the storytelling for this and the way to do it on the screen is actually relatively straightforward, but we'll work through it today. So to go back, and I've said this phrase a few times, is what is an API? So this is going to the nuts and bolts, and this is what the devs will probably know about at this point, which is what is an API? So an API is a way of interacting with a system or a service through web requests, basically. There is a few caveats to all the things I'm saying. I'm making hugely generalized statements, but the point pretty much still stands. And APIs can look complex, and you'll see code and you'll see people talk headers and referrers and query strings and all these crazy things. And actually, when everyone that's on this call knows enough about technology that they know how to go to you've joined this Teams link, so you found a Teams link, you've put it into your web browser, and it's then redirected you into Teams, something like that. So you already understand the basic point of what these APIs are doing. But sometimes the difference with APIs is that you can't do them in a web browser because you need to make the web request do things differently than a web browser lets you do. And I'll get onto that shortly. It's also worth adding at this point that we certainly have lots of our clients, and we have them internally ourselves, which we have internal own APIs. They live on our service, they do our own things, and they help our business processes. You could make them into custom connectors with the data gateway, and you can publish them to Power Automate if you want to. It's out of scope today, but just because something is internal doesn't mean you can't use it. So it's interesting to know that. So yeah, now what's a RESTful API? So to go one layer further, the basic actions that we really care about, and we talk about this in a Power Platform world, is CRUD. So create, read, update, and delete. And that's what we understand, and that's what we can associate with how data works within all our environments. Now, the internet has different ways of which you can send a request. So it has a GET, it has a POST, a PUT, a DELETE, and there is others, but they're the main four. So GET, if you go to www.google.com, that is a GET request. You're literally just saying, give me that. I don't care. I just want whatever you've got for me. A POST is a bit more. So a POST is when you press submit on a form, you're physically posting some data to it. And then PUT and DELETE. So you can sort of see if you apply those words to the action, you can sort of see what it's trying to do. And because they have this standard list of things you can do, the RESTful API sort of, regardless of where you're doing this, will use those methods. So they all almost add up perfectly. That annoys my OCD that they're not in the right order, but I couldn't put them in any other way because we all read as CRUD and GET POST. So, and when you think about it, you make sense. That sort of makes sense. So to read something, you just want it on your screen. You don't need to interact with it. You just want it there. To create it, you need to send it something. You need to send it the data to create. PUT. So you already own it, so put it back there, and delete is pretty standard. So a RESTful API is just the web methods that an API can use. Now, I know it's gone deep quick, but when you see the demos in this, hopefully it will make sense. Now, Open API is a specification for RESTful API. So that is a standard way in which you can build up documentation about your APIs, now to call them. And what that means is that whoever you're using, and if you're interacting with them, and if you're building up sort of documentation and those sorts of things, to have a standard specification means that people immediately know what you're talking about if they're in that industry. And Power Automate is no different. Power Automate relies upon RESTful APIs, Open API. They call it Swagger as well, so you see Swagger referenced in a few places. And what that means is, as long as places understand what this sort of Swagger specification is, you can import and export out of them. So you will see when you build a custom connector shortly, and you can export it, that will export out a Swagger file. So you can import that into other places that help you use web API, use APIs. Sorry. So what this means is you can chop and change, and you can put your things in different places should you want to. The other word I'm going to use a lot in this is JSON. When I first did the presentation, people weren't really sure what JSON is because it's relatively new and the low code, no code thing was just starting. I'm sure at this point people are much more au fait with what JSON is. It's basically XML about all the crap around it. And it's just a way of passing data through. So I'll talk JSON a lot, and I'm going to make a punt that you guys know what that is for a bit. And Postman. Postman is a great tool. Postman is something that if you're going to get interested in doing custom connectors and learning about APIs, this is where I would start. I wouldn't even go near Power Automate. I would start here. Postman helps you understand quite frankly, how the internet works. That's genuinely helped me understand all different parts of the internet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a look at Postman. So if I go back to here we go. So I've got a Postman, and what I'll do is I've got some of my work ones, so I'll use this for example for now. In fact, no, I'm going to use a game because a game is more fun. So this is a game called Destiny 2. I play it a lot. Anybody that knows me will know I play this game far too much. And it's one of very few games that actually has an API. So what that means is I can access clever things that it does through code. And actually, one of the things that I'm looking at talking about in the next year or so is how to interact with a game with Power Automate, and it's all through this API. So I want to get data from this link. This is a game that I had at some point in
You seem to have muted yourself, Matt. Or someone's muted you.
I think somebody muted them, maybe. Who knows? Either way, I think you got all that. How far did I get?
You were just talking about the API and the game you recently had.
Okay, fine. Yes. So if I want to go to this link on the API and I wanted to see what this did in my web browser, if I paste that in, I don't get much. I get a very unuseful error that says there's an error, you're missing some things. So what that means is that I can't call this API request directly through a web browser because it needs a bit more manipulation, and it's more than my web browser realistically can handle. So the shortcut of that is that I know that I didn't put an API key header in the request. So this is where Postman comes in, because what it lets me do is manipulate my request an extra layer on top of it so I can understand what it's doing. So if I go back into Postman, what you will see is in my headers, I've got an additional key there, which is this key here. I don't mind this being a video because I will kill this key as soon as this is over. So what I can do now is this is all the stuff that's in there. These are the standard headers. I don't actually need most of those things, but I need the API key one, and I press send. It's done the same thing, but what Postman has done here is let me customize that request in every way as I need to. So I can now see I've actually got data for it. So I've said, send me this from the website. Oh, by the way, this is my API key. So you can see all sorts of data, kills and deaths, and importantly, the fact in this is that I won the match. That's the only bit we really need to care about at this point. And that's what this is doing. So this is literally making me a web request to the internet and getting me a response back and helping me understand and interact with how the internet is working. There is a tool called Fiddler. I'll run Fiddler while I'm on the call. It could kill my PC, so let's see how this goes. What Fiddler does is helps you again understand the internet. So you'll see now if I was to make a request to a website, I just load Google. When I look at Fiddler, that's actually the amount of requests it made. It made loads of requests. And ultimately you can see there, which will be, I don't know which one it's going to be. It's going to be one of these. There we go. So I made a get request to that at some point, which gave me a response. I made a get request to all these. So this is where you can start between Fiddler and Postman. You can sort of see how the internet works and how it's quite clever. And you can see your headers and all sorts of stuff in here. So play with Fiddler at some point as well, but that's out of scope of what I'm talking about today. So I'll come back to Postman in a minute. But first I want to tell you a story. So imagine you had your phone on you and you got lost in a field and you are hundreds of miles away from anything or anyone. Let's say, I don't know, you jumped out of a plane and landed in a field. This is not a riddle, by the way. This is a pretend story. And you land and you've got your phone and you ring someone saying, lost and I need help to where I'm at. And because you've got your phone, the only thing you can get is your latitude and longitude. Or you've got this app that we'll build in a minute. Now, if you're on a conversation, you read somebody your latitude and longitude. If you miss one number out slightly, they can be very far away from where you actually are. So latitude and longitude is a pain. So lots and lots of numbers. That animation probably doesn't work well through Teams. Now, people on the call may have heard it, they may not. I've been doing lots of work for these recently as well, which is What Three Words. So What Three Words are a company that break down the entire world into 3-meter square boxes. And each one of those boxes has a unique name made up of 3 words that will help pinpoint where you are. So What Three Words, a good example usage they use it is Domino's Pizza in India. They will that you can, if you want to, check out with your what 3 words address, so they know exactly to in a 3 meter square box where your front door is. So if you were to say that in a phone call that said I'm extra pipes baggage, it sounds strange, but actually they can be very, very specific on where you are. But how do you do that? How do you convert from your latitude and longitude to your what 3 words equivalent address? So that's the story that we're going to try and do, and that's the story that we're going to try and build. So what 3 words? Let me go to here and here. Okay, so what 3 words? This is the what 3 words API, and what they will go through with you and is how to do it. And now I've said some of the words that we were talking about earlier, hopefully part of this will make sense. So when we read through this page, I'm not going to read through it all, don't worry. Ultimately, the APIs they have are here. So there is this link here, which it converts 3 word address to coordinates, and then you can do it back again. So you could do coordinates to a 3 word address. And all they are is links. And now if we read the tips, use get only. So we know what that means now. That's a very specific type of request. URL encode it, always include a valid API key, and then some core stuff. So we won't go into these things. And then they've got some examples of how you can use them. So what we can do is we can, and this is genuinely where I would recommend starting, is we have the documentation of how this should work. So let's do it in Postman. So if I go to Postman, and bear in mind at this point, I've not even been anywhere near Power Automate. I've not even booted it up yet. I have a what 3 words. I have a it's got a collection here, and they're stored in a collection. So I've got address to coordinates here, which is their link. They say, again, don't worry about API keys. They'll be dead by the end of this call. That's the link they told us. The only difference is you can see there I've put an actual key in it rather than their standard API key. There is a separate page on the website where you would get that key from. So use a get request, use parameters, and that's it. So there's no custom headers, there's no nothing extra using this. That their sole method of authorization at this point is the key in the parameter and the query string. So when I press go on that, I can now see that I've got Fiddler running. It's decided to interact. Let's close that, try again. Okay, there we go. So I can now see that filled count soap is a variety of different versions of latitude and longitude there is. It's near Bayswater, London. They're the actual coordinates, the latitude and longitude. And if I copy that link there, what that will do is that will give me a map equivalent of where we're talking about. So this would be Bayswater, London, which I think is their head office. I'm going to cough, excuse me. So that's it. So their API is super, super simple. And if you're looking at learning a sort of API, this is a great starting point because it really is a very simple API. And now what I want to do is now I understand roughly how this works and how I send a request. Now I got a response. I want to translate this into Power Automate. So in Power Automate, let's give it a refresh just because we always know how these apps can cause us problems. So I've got a few in there already, and I've been releasing some over time on my blog. So if you're ever curious, there's an IMDb one. I've got the what 3 words out there. There's an Xbox Live one I'm working on. So there's some ones that we're playing with already, but I'm going to make a brand new one. And when I make a brand new one, I've got some options. This one is interesting. You might recognize that word now. Import a Postman collection. So I've just been talking about that. Now, what that means is that if you're getting pretty good with Postman and learning what to do, you can go to here and you can export your collection and import it straight into Power Automate. So you've done everything. That will literally make the connector based on this request you've already made. You don't even need to do anything else. The caveat to that, and I don't know why this is the case at this point, is that you'll see here when I go to do the import, they only support the V1, which according to Postman is the deprecated version. So I'm not quite sure what the difference is in the versions of collections right now. But basically, if you've done all the hard work in Postman to sort of guess it, you can make a huge cheat and you can leap past through most of the stages because you've done the hard work already. But for the purposes of this demo, I won't do that because I'd be short. So instead, I won't do that, and we'll start a brand new one from scratch. Too many windows. So let's give it a name. It's demo. Oh no, hang on, I'm wrong one. So import an open API file. This is the Swagger file I was talking about. So if you've downloaded a Swagger file that's already been made, you could import it from there or from a URL. Create from Azure App Service is a relatively new thing, so I won't go into that. And then create from blank, that's what I'm going to do right now. So create from blank and give it a name. Can't spell. And there you go, I'm on it. So most important thing, this is the most important thing, it needs an icon. Please always put an icon in. You will regret that. I'm fully aware that icon was on the previous page. It didn't have them yet. I've not used them in a flow yet, but I would always recommend icons. They just make your flows nice and readable. But that's PNG with a transparent background, so I need a color on it. I want white, which is no colors. Oh, every time. Please don't say I'm the only person that does that. Okay. Okay. So give you a custom connector sort of description. This does stuff. Connect to an on-premise data gateway. That's where you would do your internal APIs. So don't fret about that now. We're not going to go to that scope. Schema. So is it secure or not? I would say most things are secure at this point. If it's not as secure, and I'd be very reticent about what you're going to send it. There is going to be certain instances where I guess they are HTTP, but I would be surprised if it doesn't have an HTTPS equivalent. So always prioritize trying to be secure. But what this bit is doing here is building up that link there. So we essentially need to build up this into Flow or into Power Automate. I'm going to keep saying Flow. It's just a habit. I still call it CRM. And I still call it CDS. Let's not get into those conversations now. And I can copy all. We want to build that up into the system. So what we want to do is we want to look for as common a domain as we can and work our way up. So I know from this documentation, and if you go back to the website, you can see that up to v3/ is consistent. So that's the bit I want to build into the very start, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm building in the consistent part of my API, so I know my path through. I'm just making it efficient. So my host in this case is going to be that. And my base URL is that. So that is the www or equivalent of the domain, and its top level domain on that, as well as the anything extra on top of that. So to refer to my Destiny one earlier, you can see that I had those things there. So in this case, I would have done HTTPS. I would have done there's my base, and then there's my set prefix. So it's just learning the consistent part because it just saves you time later on. There's no point typing that time in, time out, because you're going to use that all the time. So that's it. That's the first one done. Now I want to know if I'm going to use this, how do I authenticate? You get a drop down box, so no authentication. There is lots of APIs that don't have any authentication. They don't care. You can hammer that 1,000,000 times a day if you wanted to, and they don't care about tracking who was doing that. It's not so you always get a response. They might time out, but they don't care about that. And there's a few other options. Basic authentication is basically a username and password way that it's encrypted in into the body. Again, I wouldn't worry about that until the documentation talks about that, and then at which point it should hold your hand through it. And that's the benefits of all this, is actually when you read API documentation and follow this sort of methodology through, they sort of marry up with one another. API key, we know that's what we want. We've seen that referenced in our documents all the time, so that's good. And then OAuth is the final one, which is the more complex one, which is sort of linking with your existing systems. So, you know, when it pops up and says you need to re-log in. So sometimes, you know, when you log in somewhere and you can use your Google account or you can use your Microsoft account, that's using OAuth, so an existing account from elsewhere. And Power Automate does all the heavy lifting of handling authentication for you. If you were to pick that, you would have some options to pick on that. So you can see here, this is all stuff that, again, is not out of scope for today. But if someone is going to talk you through how to use it, generally, they're pretty solid at giving you these things, and you don't have to worry about them. But in my case, I want API key. And the two demos I've shown today are both API keys. This one is in the URL. This one is in a header. So they're different places where you can store them. And that exactly marries up with what we're seeing here. Where is it? Is it in the query, in the header? So in my case, I'm in the query. I want to give it a label and a name. I can never get the right around, so I generally keep them the same. But there is one of them is a friendly one than the other, but I like to keep them the same. So key. We know that's key because we've seen it in there. So next. And that's it. So now I can actually start building up my custom connector and doing the things I need to do. So I've got actions and I've got triggers. Triggers are the things that start it. Actions are the things that you will do within another flow. I won't really talk about triggers today, but you can build your own ones with all these webhooks and clever things like that. I've seen a lot less usage of custom connectors with triggers. I'm sure there's use cases, but I've seen a lot less of them. But custom actions, I see quite a lot. So I want to build a new action, and I want to give it a name. So in this case, I'm going to go. Let's go words to coord. I promise you, my production stuff. This is not normally as lazy as this. So I'm just take a speed. And visibility. So where does it come? If you had lots of actions, this is all to do with where do you want to see it. So we can leave that as none for now on that. And this is where Power Automate really comes into own. It comes into its own. Excuse me, I'm trying to talk too quick for the sake of it. Which is you can import a sample request and it will do the hard work for you again. So I can import from sample, and this is now looking very, very similar to what we're now used to seeing. I've got the get URL, the headers, and the body. Those 4 things now hopefully might make more sense now you've seen how Postman works. So I know I want to be a get request with a URL. I don't need custom headers within this one, whereas for my Destiny one, I will have needed the API key and a body if I was anything other than a get. A get does not take a body. So I'm going to copy out. Am I doing address to coord? I am. So I'll copy that, put that into there, get that in there, no custom headers, that's it. Now, the system is clever enough to know that that is the consistent part. So when I press import, that's actually going to handle all that for me, so I don't need to worry about that sort of stuff. And it's also stripped out the query, so it's parsed it out and it knows what is where. So now this is making my parameters that will go into my connector. So words and key. Now I can delete that because the system will automatically add that on for me based on the previous step. So that can go. I think this is where we'll test that to its see if it works. And I can edit that and I can do other things. So I can give this a description. And this is all the IntelliSense stuff within Power Automate. That's what all this is doing. So I'm just going to populate them now. I'm not going to populate any of them other than that. It's required. Again, this is depending on where it's visible within the drop-down box, the type of it. So if you need to enforce typing on it, you can do that there. And if it's a drop-down box, is it static? So ultimately, the thing we care about now is I'm just updating that parameter. The thing I changed was I made it required. No point me doing a what 3 words address without it being required. And you can now see it's got a star to it. And then the response. So it also needs to know what it's going to get back, because to do that, it needs to know what you can potentially pass into the later steps within your flow. And I can do that the same way. So I can click the default response. I can import from sample. Any headers I get back. So what you can actually do is reuse headers going forward if you want to. It's not really common. I've genuinely never used it, but I can see how people would. And I want to put a sample body in there to generate me my objects. So I can just go in there and I've already got it, right? That's, again, the benefit of Postman. I know what I'm expecting, so I can use all this sample stuff to my advantage. Paste that in there and import that, and that's built it for me. Now, the thing I find difficult for this, and it's the thing I would recommend doing over time, is that you'll see that it's give it the name of the lowest branch in its JSON. So you can see there that I've actually got 3 longitude. They live in different places. One's in coordinates, one's in whatever. But ultimately, when you use them, they're going to just show us that, you know, in the pretty Power Automate options. So this is where I would take the time now to edit their names to be what you would expect them to be. And you can see there, if you hover over it, you're getting the path. So you can take the time there to do it and set them right. So you make sure you're using the right ones, because if you use the same names all the time and you get in a mess, then you're just asking for problems for yourself. So I'm going to give that a nicer name this time. That'll do, because I'll spell it wrong. So you get the point, and then that's it. So that's now got my sample response with some data in it, and I can go back to that. It's still validating the way through it. I've got a default response back. I've got some basic stuff, and I can now go test it. So you got to create it before I can test it. So I just press create now. What that's doing behind the scenes is that's going to turn it into this Swagger thing I talked about. So while that saves it, I've got an API key here. Let me just dig it out, because I'm going to want that in a second. Come on, there we go. So I need to make a new connection to test it. And then refresh that, so I don't have the connection, there you go. And then the words, so let's go with the one I got here, craft.stump.pokers, test operation, and you can see there's the response back. So I managed to get so what that means is that this is going to handle it correctly. It's going to work through and going to go from there. Now, if you're curious, if you click into the Swagger editor, this is a relatively new thing. I think this is only a few months old. You can actually see the raw code of it. So when you really start understanding what it's doing, this is the open API specification I'm talking about. And it's all in here. So this is where you can make the changes. So any changes I'm making are being automatically reflected in here. So if you want to put this into source control, or if you want to export it and pass it on to other people or whatever, this is the sort of place you could do that. You could just give them this. You get nice, friendly documentation on how it's going to work, and that's going to help you that way. And at this point, I actually find it's quicker because I can see the path in here. So I've got into the habit now that actually if I'm making changes, I will make it here, which is absolutely fine. So I could do that there. And then if I could turn my editor off and I went back to my definition, let me update the changes. It's doing the same thing. So this is just a nicer way of doing that. There is libraries out there. There is Swagger Studios and that sort of stuff. So we'll help you do all those testing. And if I was to export this collection as the deprecated one, not there. Let me open it this side. What did that save us? I don't remember where I just saved that file. There it is. In fact, it does look different. So you can see that. No, let's ignore I said that for now. It's slightly different, so I'm not going to worry. And yeah, that swag should be there. So if I go back to here now, what we should hopefully see in the response is I didn't take the new name. Maybe I probably need to close the browser and reopen it. That wouldn't surprise me if it's cached it, because it's certainly got it there. So where am I going? There. It's one of these. I think if I go into it, it will cause a refresh. So this is where I go down a rabbit hole and regret immediately doing it. Let's just. I think it needs a refresh of the screen. But what I have the habit of doing, like I say, is I like to export that now and store it, because it's definitely worth doing, and this is where you can make all your changes and expand it going forward. So start with the pretty interface, but store this stuff behind the scenes. So now I go to flows. I'm going to make a new flow. I'm going to make it instant. I'm just going to, in fact, let's do it from power ups. Let's pretend this is what I do for now. And I custom connectors. I have my new one. What 3 words demo. There is now my action that I wrote. And now the words to check. So I would ask for that in Power Apps, and then I could then go back and I could do. Come on, you're gonna find me. Respond to a Power App, and I can add an output to that, and I can give it a number, and the number I give to that is. So you can see there. That's why I do it earlier on, because you're taking a punt. And there's nothing worse than picking the wrong one. I'm sure at some point you've all clicked something that's made a for each loop go in your thing and ruin your flow entirely. Same sort of thing. Maybe that's just me that does that as well. So there you go. I can now pass them back and I can save that, and that's it now. My custom connector is working. So I do have one I made earlier for demo purposes. So what you can see here is I've got 2 flows that do the same thing, but I've got them wired up into a Power App here. So you can see I've got a Canvas app, which is convert latitude and longitude to what 3 words, and then convert what 3 words back again. And if you just view one of those, just to prove that there's nothing extra clever, it's not. It's doing just that previous version of the what 3 words, passing it back again. And if I now go to my Edge, because for some reason Chrome has decided to not run any Canvas apps at all. I have no idea why. Every button press of that, there you go. It's calling a flow. So that's my latitude and longitude where I am right now. There's my what 3 words equivalent. I can change that, and I can go back the other way. I'm going to cough again. So extra pipes is in Nevada. Where's pipes? This is where you get lost in picking random words and seeing where they are. So I always like to end on a high, which is stump pokers, which is Anfield. In case anyone's curious, that's the kickoff spot of Anfield. And yeah, with that is how you do it. Really, that's a custom connector. Virtual power group. That's a good question. Let's try that one. It might not be one. This is where my error checking is poor. Is this a group? Is this a place? It is. There you go. There's an actual place in Fogo Island in Newfoundland and Labrador. Middle of the sea, but you're not far away. And yeah, with that, that is, I think, a rough intro into it. With the ultimate tip of learn Postman. I think that's to me the biggest takeaway that I would suggest anybody does.